Good morning, First Presbyterian. My name is Remi Andrews. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist here in the Cedar Rapids area. I work primarily out of a private practice that I operate called Beacon Inclusive Therapy Services. I'm so excited to be with you all this morning and addressing some of these topics that you have taken on in this growth series. It's quite interesting to see some of the different topics that were put forward, and I'm excited to speak on spiritual growth specifically. Our world is kind of facing so many unique challenges, and having my perspective as a mental health professional, it's a lot sometimes. And so I think I kind of wanted to break it down today and talk about how we can increase our resiliency through some of these tough challenges, but also find ways to grow in the middle of some of the things that our world is experiencing currently. As we all know, we've been dealing with the coronavirus for several months at this point, and with no real end in sight, it kind of creates this constant state of stress for all of us. So what are we turning to in that amount of time? I know anecdotally from many of my clients and friends and family that oftentimes we're turning to food. That I've seen many a meme or just in conversation talking about, oh, well, I graze all the time. I eat all the time. I'm hearing even substance use has increased. I don't have anything to do. I don't want to think about things. I'm drinking more. I'm smoking a joint more. And we're also hearing just distractions. What are we using as distractions? Oftentimes that looks like a lot of time on technology, a lot of time on in front of our computers, and I kind of want to break that down and let's find new ways let's strategize. Let's talk about things that are small course corrections over time to help us deal with some of the adversity that we're handling right now. I also wanted to tie in some brain science today. I really am passionate about the brain as a trauma-informed therapist. It's something that I spend a lot of time working with. We don't always have a lot of general knowledge about how trauma affects the brain. So, but the amount of research that we've done since 2000, so the last 20 years, we've exponentially grown in the last 20 years what we have known about the brain in modern medicine for the 150 years prior to that. Like, we've mapped parts of the brain. We've learned exactly what the limbic system, which I'm going to touch on later, does. We've learned how trauma is stored in the brain. We've learned what parts of the brain are integral to a community, to a faith-based community. So I wanted to touch first on that. So I mentioned the limbic system. So when we are stressed, or when we are in a situation that maybe we don't feel like we can handle, which the world is kind of in a situation, it's new, it's different than what we, especially in the United States, have dealt with prior. We haven't dealt with a pandemic quite to this level. So a lot of us are experiencing stress levels that we are unused to. And oftentimes when we experience stress, it's really difficult for us to then connect in other ways, whether it be with our faith community, whether it be with our peers, whether it be at work or with our families. And we find those dynamics changing. And when those dynamics change, growth becomes really difficult. We have a hard time accessing just basic connection with other folks, and it prevents us from growing. And oftentimes we need to be in that place of connection in order to grow. So I want to talk a little bit about how we can calm our brains down. What can we do to take care of ourselves? Oftentimes that looks very different for each person. When we deal with a situation like the pandemic, or even like the conversations around racial equality or equity that are happening in our world, just addressing the injustice of small businesses needing to shut down, but large businesses being in operation, or the racial divides that we're experiencing. When we look at it, we see a big global problem. And when we approach that, it's really difficult to break it down. But that is one of the key pieces to A, learning resilience around this topic, but B, making any kind of change. So the first piece of what we're going to talk about is when we're stressed out, when we're in a place where we are maybe approaching burnout, like our brain is on fire. I want us to find some things that allow us to take care of ourselves. For a lot of folks, that's through prayer or reading a spiritual text. I have found, the research shows us, that oftentimes being in nature allows ourselves to connect that much greater. And if we're in God's creation, what better way to connect or recharge or let our brains just kind of calm down and have some space. And the research I mentioned is it's therapy research, granted, but it shows that therapy is so much more effective, like if for certain folks in nature, like when we're allowed to kind of connect in a different way to the world. So I encourage all of you, in a safe way, to get outside, go find a trail to walk on that's not overly populated. If that's difficult, walk around your neighborhood at a time of day where it's safe to do so. I think oftentimes we need to find a way to relax our body and relax our mind, but also create a connection to the world around us. And that so much is part of spirituality as well. It's not just the connection between us and God, even in like in a situation such as church, but those connections outside is through God's people, is through God's creation. The next strategy I want to introduce to you is small course corrections. When I work with couples, oftentimes, like I mentioned before, I'm working with trauma-informed, I do trauma-informed work. So oftentimes when I'm working with couples, I tend to get those couples that are bringing former relationships in, childhood abuse, substance use or abuse, so many different things are a big part of what we're bringing into our relationships. And I talk with people oftentimes about the idea of, like, if it's just us, it might be the size of a yacht. Let's say we have a 25-foot yacht that we're dealing with. But when we join together with another person and have all this stuff to manage, oftentimes it feels like an aircraft carrier. Like, we've got people coming and going. If there's children involved, we've got different reactions that when there's two people involved that we weren't expecting, that are abnormal. There's sometimes even two captains feeling like they need to navigate the ship. And oftentimes that can be very, very counterproductive for a lot of folks, especially folks that have dealt with trauma in their life. And even folks that maybe haven't addressed trauma in their life. It can make marriage, having children, doing life together is oftentimes overwhelming. Like, how do we create this connection with this other person that we can nurture over, the next 40 to 50 years of our life? But we talk about this aircraft carrier. When it's that yacht that we have, we can make changes fairly quickly. A course correction is an easy thing to do. We can recognize the danger and change it. However, with an aircraft carrier, it takes some time. And we have to be alert for those things, those potential dangers, and start making course corrections earlier. And oftentimes those course corrections are little things over the course of time. So when we relate this back to our relationship with our faith community, or our relationship with ourselves, or our relationship with growth, I think that's one of those things that is integral, like making small corrections over time. How can I nurture this area? How can I create a space that is safe to make course corrections? And I think when we nurture when we create a system that is capable of change, over time we create a space that is ready for growth. We create a time that is ready to have new input and is capable of taking those seeds that we've planted and growing, and we see, when I think of spiritual connection, I think both of that peace within myself, but in that peace with my community. And I think when, again, we make those connections, when we make those course corrections, we see that space growing exponentially, both within ourselves, but within our community. So resilience and adversity are such interesting topics, because we've all faced adversity. We've all faced things that have, how do we tackle this? Like, we get so overwhelmed that it's really difficult to approach those things. So again, circling back, breaking it down, like having a handful of go-to ideas of things that you can do to take care of your emotional, mental, spiritual self. Like, oftentimes that looks like, again, the walking, connecting, having a good friend that is a great spiritual advisor for you, which again, relationships take time to develop and nurture. But when we circle back around to that space of growth, we find that connection happening so much more easily when we have nurtured that, when we have created that space of using these things. Oftentimes prayer, both by yourself and as a community, that connection of praying for a specific purpose is such a powerful thing, both in the changes that we see in our brain, because again, I'm a brain science nerd, but the changes that we see in our community when we're all praying for a specific purpose creates a path of growth and resilience. I also encourage folks to not try to tackle the issue all at once. Like, again, the course corrections. What can I do in my daily life that slowly moves either away from the strategies that I'm using that are creating stress, which may not even be strategies, may just be our defense mechanisms to stress and anxiety, to moving to a space of okay, what can I do to manage that? If we're in a really heightened space, if we're in a space where adversity has moved to crisis for us, sometimes that's just about meeting basic needs. Sometimes we're looking at taking drinks of water. We're looking at I don't recognize my own hunger. I don't recognize loneliness. I don't recognize exhaustion. So I need to take a nap. I need to take a drink. I need to eat a small snack. I need to maybe, again, reach out to those people in your life who you know are a connection. And then once we've got those basic needs met, then we can move on to, taking walks on a regular basis, doing some kind of stretching or yoga routine. That we found that stretching and yoga practices tend to create an awareness of our own bodies, and when we've created an awareness of our bodies, we're better able to navigate our space, both within our spiritual communities but within the community at large. We also encourage journaling, writing it out. I know several individuals who often write their journals in the form of prayer. So it's pretty much their journal reads like a letter to God, but also just writing it for that brain dump. It allows us to take what is happening in here and externalize it in a way that we can choose to then reincorporate it into our, choose what's necessary in everything that we've dumped out, or just choose to leave it there. Let it go. Let that space, maybe it just needs to be out of our head in order for us to be able to face the challenges ahead of us. And then I think as far as developing spiritual growth practices, I think that's a deeply individual process, but oftentimes, again, it goes to finding community. That is one of the things that I am most passionate about in all of the work that I do, in all of the spaces that I've developed over the last several years. Finding community is essential to growth. Finding people that we can depend on for connection and for attachment, healthy attachment, and for common interests and ideas and maybe uncommon interests and ideas. Sometimes it's healthy to be friends with people that are very different from us, so that we can learn to navigate some of the adversity that our world is facing. So I hope these things were helpful to you. I want to create a space for all of us individually where we can find that internal space that we can nurture, so that when spiritual growth happens, we're ready for it. We're ready to face where it takes us, as well as how it potentially can change the community around us. Because when I think even one person growing and developing their spiritual practice can change an entire community. And I think when we're ready for that, it's such an incredibly powerful thing. And I think we then are growing resilience as a community when one person is able to grow and develop and kind of show us the way. So all of that being said, again, I appreciate so much the ability and the opportunity, I should say, to share with you this morning. And take care of yourselves. This is a time, like I said, that is unprecedented for many of us, and it can lead to new and wonderful changes that each of us can make in our life. Have a great day.